How did cowboys sleep during brutal cold in the Wild West, and more relaxing history? Welcome, dear listener, to a journey back in time, to a world that existed long, long ago, a world of wide-open spaces, and the quiet, enduring spirit of those who lived within them. Tonight we will drift into the heart of the American West, specifically the late 19th century, a time when the land was still raw and life was lived close to nature. We will observe the rhythms of daily existence, the simple necessities and the profound silence that shaped the lives of ordinary people, particularly the cowboys and their companions on the vast, untamed plains. Imagine with me the sprawling canvas of the Western Territories, bathed in the soft glow of a slowly setting sun. The air is cool, beginning to carry the crisp promise of the approaching night. The cattle scattered across the distant hills are settling for their own slumber, their low moans barely audible. Against the deepening quiet, this is a world largely untouched by the clamor of modern life, a world where the stars shine with an intensity we seldom witness today, a silent, glittering dome stretching from horizon to horizon. Our focus tonight is not on grand adventures or dramatic tales, but on the quiet, often overlooked aspects of life. How did these individuals, these men, and sometimes women, who spent their days under the vast, indifferent sky, find comfort and sleep when the brutal cold descended upon the land? How did they prepare for the long, frigid nights far from the warmth and shelter of established homes? Let us begin with the end of a typical day on the range. The sun dips lower, painting the clouds in hues of orange and purple, then fading to soft pinks and grays. The last light clings to the highest peaks before surrendering to the encroaching darkness. The cowboys, after a long day of riding, of herding, of mending fences, or branding, are gathering around the chuck wagon, if one is present, or simply around a crackling fire. If they are out on the open range, the scent of wood smoke drifts gently on the evening breeze, mingling with the earthy smell of the prairie and the faint aroma of coffee brewing in a pot hung over the flames. The cook, often a grizzled, quiet man, moves with practiced ease, preparing a simple, hearty meal, perhaps beans, thick and simmering, with a piece of salt pork or dried beef, a staple that could withstand the rigors of travel and the absence of refrigeration. There might be biscuits baked in a Dutch oven, buried in the coals, their crust golden, and their insides soft. The sounds are few and muted, the soft clinking of tin plates and cups, the low murmur of voices, occasionally the whinny of a horse or the distant howl of a coyote. These are not boisterous gatherings, but quiet, reflective moments. The day's work has been hard, and the body craves rest and sustenance. Each man finds his spot around the fire's warmth, his gaze often distant, contemplating the vastness around him. As the meal concludes and the last drops of coffee are savored, the temperature begins to drop. Noticeably, the air grows sharper, carrying with it the chill of the coming night. This is when the preparations for sleep become paramount, especially if the weather promises to be severe. A cowboy's bedroll was his most prized possession. After his horse and saddle, it was his sanctuary, his portable home against the elements. Typically, it consisted of a canvas tarpaulin, heavy and durable, which served as both a ground cover and a protective outer layer. Inside were blankets, thick wool blankets, acquired from various sources, sometimes army surplus, sometimes traded for or purchased. In a distant town, the more blankets, the better, particularly when facing the unforgiving cold of a prairie winter. Some might have a ground cloth made of oilcloth or canvas laid directly on the earth to provide a barrier against moisture and the raw cold seeping up from below. On top of this would be a canvas sheet, sturdy and waterproof, perhaps 6 by 12 feet in size. This canvas would be spread out, and then the blankets carefully layered, one upon the other. The arrangement was crucial for trapping warmth and creating a snug cocoon. Often a cowboy might have a small, thin mattress or a padded quilt placed directly on the canvas to add a layer of insulation and a modicum of comfort above the hard ground. Then came the wool blankets, perhaps 3, 4, or even 5 in succession, depending on what he owned and how cold the night was expected to be. These blankets were not neatly folded, but rather spread out, overlapping to eliminate any gaps where cold air could penetrate. Finally, the large canvas would be folded over and wrapped around the entire assembly, creating a kind of sleeping bag that was both insulated and protected from dew or light rain, or even falling snow. The open end might be secured with ropes or buckles to keep it tight and prevent the cold from creeping in. This portable sanctuary was then rolled up tightly into a compact cylinder and tied with straps to be easily transported on the back of a pack horse or secured to the saddle. But simply having a bedroll was not enough. When the truly brutal cold descended, the cowboy knew the land. He read the signs of the weather in the sky and in the subtle changes in the wind. If a severe cold snap or a blizzard was anticipated, extra precautions were taken. One of the most important was the choice of sleeping location. It was rarely on open, exposed ground, unless absolutely unavoidable. Cowboys would seek out natural shelters, a hollow in the earth, the lee side of a rise, a grove of trees, or even the protection offered by a rock outcropping. These natural formations could break the wind and provide a valuable barrier against the biting chill. A small temporary windbreak might even be fashioned from branches or loose stones. If the situation permitted, and the need was great, sometimes, if they were near a small creek or river, they might find a slightly sunken bank where the cold air tended to settle less harshly than on higher ground, or they might position themselves close to the cattle, as the animals themselves generated a surprising amount of body heat, and their presence could help warm the immediate surroundings. It was a subtle but often effective strategy for survival. As the darkness deepened and the stars began to truly blaze in the inky sky, the last embers of the campfire would slowly fade to a soft, pulsing glow. The men would begin to slip into their bedrolls. It was a process that required a certain practiced rhythm. First, loosening the ties, unrolling the canvas, and spreading out the blankets, carefully, each one a barrier against the cold. The cowboy would remove his boots, shaking out any dust or debris. He might keep his hat on for an extra layer of warmth for his head and ears, especially. If the night was bitter, he would slip in, pulling the blankets up and tucking them in tightly around his body. The canvas outer layer would be drawn up and over him, effectively sealing him in against the elements. Inside this cocoon, the world outside would slowly fade away. The sounds would be muffled. The wind's howl softened to a distant whisper. The only light would be the faint residual glow of the dying fire, or the brilliant, unwavering light of the stars filtering through any small opening. The air inside his bedroll would gradually warm from his own body heat, creating a small personal microclimate, a refuge from the harsh realities of the freezing night. It was not luxurious by any means, but it was functional, it was effective, and it was often the only thing standing between comfort and misery, or worse, on truly frigid nights, when the temperature plummeted well below freezing and the wind howled relentlessly. Even more drastic measures might be taken. Some cowboys would sleep fully clothed, adding every layer. They possessed extra shirts of vests, even their heavy coats, pulled over their normal attire. These layers were essential for trapping air and providing insulation. Felt hats were often pulled low over the ears, or a bandana or neckerchief might be wrapped around the face to protect against frostbite and the cutting wind. Hands might be tucked inside pockets or even inside the sleeves of an outer shirt to keep them warm. Another ingenious and perhaps surprisingly effective method involved heating stones. If a fire was maintained For a long enough period, smooth, flat stones could be placed near the flames to absorb heat. Once sufficiently warm, but not scalding hot, these stones, wrapped in cloth or simply placed at the feet or against the torso inside the bedroll, could provide a welcome source of radiant heat that would last for several hours. The warmth would slowly dissipate as the night progressed, but it could make a significant difference in enduring the coldest hours before dawn. Sometimes, if they were in a temporary camp with a larger fire, the cowboys might dig a shallow trench beneath where their bedroll would be placed and build a small fire in that trench, allowing it to burn down to coals before covering it with a layer of earth. The residual heat from these buried coals would gently warm the ground beneath them, providing a form of natural radiant floor heating, a subtle warmth that could be surprisingly comforting and help ward off the deep chill from the frozen earth. This required careful planning and execution to ensure safety and avoid scorching their bedding, but it was a testament to their resourcefulness. The silence on these long, cold nights was profound, broken only by the occasional shriek of an owl, the rustle of dry grass in the wind, or the soft, contented breathing of the herd nearby. It was a silence that enveloped everything, a heavy blanket of quiet that could be both calming and a little unnerving for those unaccustomed to it. For the cowboy, it was simply the sound of the world at rest. Sleep on the open range was rarely a deep, unbroken slumber, especially during the winter months. The mind remained subtly alert, attuned to the sounds of the night, listening for any disturbance that might signal trouble for the cattle or for the camp. A sudden change in wind, a distant coyote howl, too close, or the restless movements of the herd could trigger an instant waking response. Often one or two cowboys would be assigned to night watch, riding slowly around the perimeter of the resting herd, their figures silhouetted against the moonlit landscape. These riders would hum soft songs or talk quietly to the cattle, their presence, a calming influence against any nervousness or tendency to stampede. This rotating watch allowed the others to gain some precious uninterrupted sleep, knowing that vigilant eyes were keeping watch over all. The cold on the prairie was not just a physical sensation. It was a constant companion, a force that shaped their movements, their preparations, and their very understanding of survival. It dictated what they wore, how they built their fires, where they chose to camp, and how they protected their bodies from its relentless grip. Awakening in the dark hours before dawn on a cold winter morning was a slow, gradual process. The cold would penetrate even the thickest bedroll. Eventually, a subtle chill that seeped into the bones. The first hint of gray light on the eastern horizon would signal the approaching end of the long night. The cowboys would slowly begin to stir, reluctant to leave the relative warmth of their blankets. But duty called, and the day's work was already waiting. The first task would be to rekindle the fire, a small blaze, starting from embers, if any remained, or by carefully coaxing new flames from dry kindling. The smoke would rise in a thin column against the pale sky, carrying with it the promise of warmth and hot coffee. The process of packing up was equally deliberate. The bedroll, carefully rolled and tied, ready for the day's travel. The chill in the air would be biting, the ground often frozen hard as rock. There would be no hurried movements, but a steady, methodical rhythm as they prepared themselves for another day under the vast and often challenging western sky. Beyond the cowboys, other inhabitants of the Wild West also faced the extreme cold. Settlers in their small, rough cabins, built perhaps of logs or sod, would likewise battle the winter elements. Their homes, though more permanent than a bedroll, were often rudimentary and difficult to heat. Small cast-iron stoves would burn wood or dried buffalo chips, their hungry flames providing a welcome, but often insufficient source of warmth. Windows, if they existed, would be small, and often covered with oiled paper or animal hides, rather than glass to conserve heat. Doors would be thick and tightly sealed with cloth or stuffed with rags to prevent drafts. The entire family might sleep together in one room or even in one large bed, their combined body heat helping to ward off the bitter cold. During the long winter nights, inside these simple dwellings, the sounds would be different but equally muted. The crackle of the fire, the soft breathing of family members, perhaps the occasional creak of the cabin walls as they settled in the cold, the soft glow of an oil lamp or a tallow candle would cast long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls before being extinguished, leaving the room in profound darkness. The rhythm of life in these homes was tied to the sun, rising with the first light and preparing for bed soon after the sun had set. The quiet chores of the evening, drawing water from the well if it wasn't frozen solid, preparing a simple supper, mending clothes or tools by the dim light of a lamp. These were not busy, bustling evenings, but slow, deliberate, and often silent affairs, a quiet preparation for the long hours of darkness and cold. Children, if they were present, would be tucked into bed, often with hot bricks or stones, wrapped in cloth, placed at their feet to keep them warm through the night. They would listen to the wind whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls or the soft, distant cries of wild animals. It was a lullaby of the wilderness, a constant reminder of the world outside their fragile but comforting shelter. The early morning in these cabins would be greeted with the rekindling of the fire, a slow process of coaxing warmth back into the chilled rooms. The smell of wood smoke and perhaps coffee or a simple porridge would slowly fill the small space as the family prepared for another day, facing the stark beauty and harsh realities of the untamed West. Even in the nascent towns that slowly began to dot the landscape, the cold was a formidable adversary. Buildings were often hastily constructed with thin walls and leaky windows. Heating was expensive and labor-intensive, requiring constant feeding of stoves with wood or coal. Saloons, the centers of social life, would often keep roaring fires in large pot-bellied stoves, providing a refuge from the outside chill. Travelers arriving in town on cold nights would seek out the warmth of the common room before venturing to their basic and often unheated hotel rooms. These hotel rooms were typically very simple: a bed, a wash basin, a chair. The heating might consist of a small stove in the corner which required constant attention, or simply the residual warmth from the hallway or a downstairs common area. Guests would often sleep with extra blankets and their heaviest clothes pulled close against the cold. The silence of the town, after the late-night clamor of the saloons faded, would be punctuated by the distant rumble of a train or the soft sifting of falling snow. The understanding of sleep and its importance was deeply ingrained in these people. It was not a luxury, but a necessity, a vital component of survival. In a demanding environment, the ability to rest, to recuperate, to prepare the body for another day of labor was paramount. The quiet, dark hours of the night were a time for stillness, for peace, for the body and mind to find their equilibrium. So, as we drift deeper into the night, let us hold in our minds these images of resourcefulness, of quiet endurance, of the profound beauty and challenge of life in the late 19th century. American West, the vastness of the land, the intensity of the stars, the soft glow of a dying campfire, the gentle rhythm of breathing inside a thick bedroll or a simple cabin. Imagine the feeling of the crisp, clean air, the scent of pine or sagebrush, the subtle warmth of a hidden fire under the earth, the complete silence that settles over the land as the world goes to sleep. It is a world that whispers of resilience, of harmony with nature, and of the enduring human spirit. Let these quiet images and the gentle cadence of these words guide you further into your own rest as you picture the soft, fading light of a distant, bygone era, a time of quiet, enduring beauty. The stars continue to shine above the vast, sleeping plains, and all is still and peaceful. Good night, sweet dreams. The fire is now a bed of deep orange embers. The heat it radiates is steady, soft, and waning. Let us continue our journey through this quiet world, looking closer at the materials, the textures, and the small, repetitive actions that brought comfort to those who lived under the open sky. Think of the canvas, that heavy, woven cotton. It had a specific scent, a mixture of dry earth, old wood smoke, and the faint, waxy smell of waterproofing. It was stiff in the cold, making a slow, rhythmic crinkle as the cowboy adjusted his position under the weight of his layers. Each movement was deliberate, slow, careful not to let the precious, trapped warmth escape into the biting night air. Below him, the earth was hard and unyielding, yet it held a certain ancient stability. If he had been wise, he might have gathered a few handfuls of dry prairie grass or soft pine needles to spread beneath his bedroll, a natural cushion that offered just a hint of softness and a layer of insulation against the frozen ground. You can almost hear the dry rustle of the straw settling under his weight as he finds that perfect, still position. Outside the bedroll, the frost is beginning to form. It creeps across the leather of his saddle, resting nearby, and edges the brim of his discarded hat. The stars above are so bright, they seem to hum, a silver vibration in the absolute silence. There is no wind now, only the stillness of a world frozen in time. The cattle, a few yards away, appear as dark, motionless mounds, their breath rising in tiny, pale puffs, disappearing instantly into the dark. Let us consider the clothing, the intimate layers that stayed against the skin. Wool was the great protector. Long undergarments, thick, slightly scratchy, but incredibly warm, even if they became damp. Then a flannel shirt, perhaps a heavy wool vest with pockets, where a man might keep a small pocket knife or a piece of string, items of utility that shared his warmth throughout the night. The weight of these clothes, combined with the blankets, created a sense of security, a heavy, grounding pressure that helped the mind release the tensions of the long day's ride. The body, tired from hours in the saddle, feels a deep, sinking sensation into the earth. Muscles that were taut and strained slowly, very slowly, begin to soften and let go. Imagine the silence of a winter forest where a lone traveler might be resting. The trees, tall pines and firs, stand like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with a dusting of dry, powdery snow. Occasionally, a small clump of snow might lose its grip and fall with a soft, muffled thud onto the white carpet below. A sound so small It only emphasizes the vastness of the quiet. In the towns, the silence was different, but no less deep. The boardwalks, empty of boots, the hitching posts, standing lonely in the moonlight inside a boarding house. The air in the hallways would be frigid, the floorboards letting out a sharp, dry protest. If anyone dared to move, the residents, tucked under heavy quilts, would be mere shadows in the darkness. Their dreams, perhaps of spring, or of the warm, summer sun on their faces. In those rooms, a person might have a ceramic jug filled with hot water, tucked at the foot of the bed. Its warmth would slowly seep through the thick wool socks, providing a localized, comforting heat that made the rest of the cold room feel far away. The steady, slow pulse of one's own heart becomes the only clock ticking away the long, dark hours. Everything in this time moved at the pace of a walking horse or a flickering flame. There was no rush to the night, no blue lights, no humming machinery, only the natural, slow progression of the moon across the sky and the gradual cooling of the stones. The mind, free from the clutter of modern noise, could drift like a leaf on a still pond, observing, reflecting, and eventually surrendering to sleep. The cowboy, in his bedroll, might see the Milky Way stretching like a luminous, dusty path. Above him, he knows the constellations, not by their formal names, perhaps, but by their positions in the sky at different times of the year. They are his companions, his landmarks in the velvet dark. He watches them with heavy lids until they blur into a soft silver mist. His breathing slows, becoming deep and regular. Each exhale is a faint, ghostly mist inside the small, dark space of his canvas wrap. The world outside is harsh, yes, and the cold is a constant threat. But in this moment, wrapped in wool and canvas on the floor of the world, he is safe, he is warm, and he is at rest. Think of the seasons and how they dictated the ritual of sleep. In the summer, the bedroll might be just a single blanket and the canvas left open to catch the cool night breeze. But in the winter, it becomes a fortress, a carefully constructed sanctuary that requires knowledge and respect for the elements. The silence continues, stretching out over the miles of empty prairie, over the snow-capped mountain passes, and through the quiet, sleeping towns. It is a silence that heals, a silence that restores, a silence that belongs to the past. You are there in that quiet, feeling the weight of the blankets, hearing the soft rhythmic breathing of the world at rest. The cold is outside, but you are tucked away safe and still. The embers are now only a faint red memory in the ash, and the stars are guiding you into a deep, dreamless slumber. The darkness of the deep night is now at its most profound, that heavy, still hour, just before the first hint of light, when the cold is at its sharpest, and the world seems to hold its breath. In the camp, the silence is absolute. The fire is now a circle of pale, gray ash, a quiet ghost of the warmth it once provided. And yet, beneath the layers of canvas and wool, the warmth persists. A small, stubborn glow of life against the frozen vastness. The cowboy stirs, just slightly, feeling the weight of the frost-nipped air against the small patch of skin where his face meets the night. He pulls the blanket a fraction higher, tucking it under his chin, a slow, rhythmic movement that feels like a heavy wave in a calm sea. Far to the east, a thin, pale line begins to dissolve the ink of the horizon. It is not yet light, but rather a lessening of the dark, a soft charcoal gray that slowly reveals the silhouettes of the world, the jagged edges of the horizon, the rounded backs of the sleeping cattle, the skeletal branches of a lone cottonwood tree, standing patient in the cold. One by one, the stars begin to dim, as if their silver lamps are being turned down by a steady, invisible hand. The silence, which was once heavy, now feels light and expectant. A single bird, perhaps a meadowlark, stirs in the dry grass, letting out a tentative, solitary note that hangs in the crisp air like a crystal bell. The night watchman, his coat collar turned up, his breath a steady plume of white, rides his horse at a slow, walking pace. The muffled thud of hooves on the frozen earth is the heartbeat of the waking camp. He watches the line of gray turn to a faint, dusty rose, and then to a pale, cold gold inside the bedrolls. The transition from sleep to waking is a long, lingering process. There is no sudden alarm, no jarring noise, only the gradual awareness of the body's weight and the creeping chill that signals the fire needs tending. A hand, gloved in wool, reaches out from beneath the canvas. The air hits the skin, sharp and bracing, a reminder of the reality of the high plains. The first man to rise moves with a stiff, deliberate grace. He does not rush, for the cold does not permit hurried movements. He kneels by the ash, his knees crunching softly on the frost-covered ground. He clears a small space, finding the last buried embers, the secret heart of the fire that survived the long night. He adds a few shards of dry kindling, tiny slivers of cedar or pine, and blows a slow, steady breath until a thin thread of blue smoke begins to curl upward. The first flame, a tiny, flickering orange tongue, tastes the cold air and begins to grow, feeding on the wood, spreading its soft, crackling warmth. into the immediate circle. The scent of that first morning smoke is the true signal that the night has ended. It drifts over the other bedrolls, a familiar, comforting aroma that mingles with the smell of frost and damp earth. Soon, the clinking of a coffee pot, the sound of water being poured, the soft, metallic scrape of a shovel. These are the morning's quiet music. The coffee, black and strong, is the first comfort. The tin cup is hot against the palms, the steam rising to warm the nose and cheeks. Each sip is a slow, warming trail that travels deep into the chest, awakening the senses and preparing the spirit for the day's labor. The cattle, now standing, begin to move, their hooves breaking the thin crust of frost with a sound like crumbling parchment. They low softly to one another, a deep, resonant vibration that carries across the waking prairie. The sun finally clears the edge of the earth, a cold, brilliant disk that turns the frost into a field of diamonds, a blinding, temporary beauty that will soon vanish as the air warms. Everything is slow, the saddling of the horses, the tightening of the cinches, the rolling of the bedrolls. Each task is a ritual, performed with a quiet, practiced economy of motion. The cowboy rolls his canvas, pressing the air out, tucking the blankets tight, securing the leather straps with steady, calloused fingers. His home is once again a compact bundle, ready to follow him wherever the herd might lead. The vastness of the West is now fully revealed, miles upon miles of rolling hills and distant peaks, all bathed in the pale, searching light of a winter morning. It is a world of immense space and profound solitude. But for those who lived here, it was a world of connection to the earth, to the animals, and to the quiet rhythms of existence. As the camp is packed and the riders move out, the spot where they slept remains a small circle of flattened grass and a patch of gray ash slowly cooling in the sun. The wilderness, vast and indifferent, will soon reclaim the space, leaving no trace of the dreams that were dreamt under the stars. The day has begun, but the peace of the night lingers in the bones, a quiet strength gathered in the silence and the cold. The journey continues across the wide, open land under the watchful eye of the sun and the endless unfolding sky. Would you like me to tell you about the quiet life inside the sod houses, or perhaps the hushed atmosphere of a long-distance stagecoach journey through the snowy mountain passes?